if you can find that, I will marry you.
It had actually been pro-painted by one of the guys at the Newcastle Games Workshop, and this was around about 1989 to 1990ish, I think.
So it would have been a pretty darn nice paint job.
Oh, it was a nice paint job. The guys at Newcastle were great. It was back when I was about late teens, just hitting 20. And let me think, there were 3 people worked there, and all 3 of them were called Chris, which led to some confusion. Although, of course, fortunately there was a big Chris, and a little Chris, and a Chris the manager, which always makes things easier.
Cool.
And of course, you know, it helps as well if one has a limp and a big nose. All the other ways you can add a prefix to the word Chris.
So you're deliberately picking on my foibles, aren't you, with the big nose and the limp?
I was known as that one who can't paint Chris.
Well, it's you.
I remember I used to turn up every week and buy things from the box of bits. I used to love that box of bits.
Okay, so that's the first level of highlights done. We're going to. You can see it's added a bit of form already. All we're going to do for the next layer is add a bit more.
That sounds good.
A bit more sunburst yellow, and paint them on a smaller area. So make sure you keep this, because you want to keep it in the same shade, kind of thing. So there we go.
Lovely.
And because we've added paint, we need to add a bit more water to make sure it flows. That's, you know, especially if you get into doing freehand, you know, all the designs and the glyphs and stuff.
Mm.
If it doesn't flow, you
doesn't be able to work with it really.
So again, the same procedure on the upper surfaces, a smaller area than before.
I'll just lock in with the camera again. Yeah, it was quite funny, you know, remembering some of the Games Workshop tales in the past. And for those of you who think I'm waffling, you know, this video is a lot easier when you have actually got something to listen to as well.
Definitely.
Especially when you're making it. Yeah, I remember Tyranids had literally just came out.
That's going
around. This is going back quite a long way, and they brought out Space Hulk, the game. And I remember, I think, some 1989, 1990 issue game, not Red Dwarf, White Dwarf, had, you could come to the shop and play against my friend at the time, Eugene, and they had Eugene's Gene Stealers, I remember it was advertised as. And if you beat Eugene and his Gene Stealers in Space Hulk, you won a Space Marine, I think, a little Space Marine figure. And it was a great little promo, because those Gene Stealers were just not nice to play against.
No, evil in hand to
They
hand.
ripped you a new one. I can't remember in that game there was a Dreadnought as well, wasn't there?
That was
What
Space
was that?
Crusade.
That's Space Crusade. That's right. One of the very early Dreadnoughts.
Yeah, and that's where we got Necrons from.
Was it?
If you remember, there were this is my theory. I don't have a direct line into Games Workshop themselves, but there used to be miniatures called Chaos Androids,
Oh yes.
and they look remarkably like
I remember those now.
Necrons.
I mean, it could be a similarity. I find it quite an interesting coincidence. The Necrons came out round about the time of the Necromonger in that Vin Diesel movie.
Yeah. Oh, with the Necromongers.
I know that was complete coincidence, but I actually am one of the few people who really enjoyed that movie an awful lot.
Which one, the first or the second?
Second.
Definitely.
I thought the second one was just a complete romp. It was just fantastic. What more could you want? You know, it had chicks, it had guns, it had a space prison, it had mad people in a spaceship, and it had mad zombie robot people.
Definitely.
I mean, is there anything else you need apart from that?
I did find it very. I thought the imagery was very inspired by.
The imagery was
40K.
fantastic. I'd say so myself. I would have said so personally. The film, to be quite honest, looked to me like it may as well have been ripped from the pages of 40K.
Yeah.
A bit, and I was surprised that more people didn't kind of say so.
Well, Games Workshop have this reputation where
God bless their very kindly soul.
Yeah, apparently Games Workshop have never done anything original. I remember getting into this argument with a D&D guy.
Oh, there's been a lot of arguments about that, hasn't there? You know, the old stormtroopers versus Imperial armour versus whatever.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the American role-play games of the time that they're referring to were all Tolkien derivatives. They were very, high fantasy.
Well, old Papa Tolkien came up with a hell of a lot of stuff if you think about it. I mean, I know he took a lot of stuff from folk tales and the old kind of Irish pixies and things like this, but he came up with pretty much the fundamental basis of most of our modern fantasy.
Definitely, but Games Workshop used to get a lot of flack because they say, "Oh, there's nothing original." But when
I think we only have to look at blooming Dreadnoughts really to see a fantastically original piece.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big Workshop fan, and for me, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the first time I played that was the first real blood and guts and snot roleplay game.
Mm.
It's really dark. It was German.
It was very bloody knuckles.
Yeah, it was German in inspiration, wasn't it? You had that
Teutonic.
Yeah, very much so, and it just wasn't high fantasy. It was an antidote. I mean, the high fantasy stuff worked because of the efforts of the adventure writers, basically, because they were very
They
generic
did
worlds.
very wisely, I think, use a community of story writers which made stories through Games Workshop and eventually through the Black Library, which supported and grew out the scope of their whole kind of army basis. And of course, people reading along were able to then purchase characters that they liked from their favourite stories to incorporate into their armies. I mean, I'm very much a fan of Gaunt and the Gaunt's Ghost series.
Yeah, I'm
quite interested personally in getting a hold of a nice little Gaunt's Ghost set.
Tanith
first and only.
Yeah, I'm a Commissar Kane man through and through. Caiaphas Kane.
Well, I've yet to read Caiaphas Kane, but Rob's very kindly bought me a book to read on it, so I'm looking forward to having a read through that. Unfortunately, much to Rob's dismay, he's going to find I'm what's known as a bath time reader, so his book is in grave peril.
It's alright. You can have them. I've read the Caiaphas Kane about 7 or 8 times.
You see, dear listener, you're hearing Rob say that. However, the book arrived in pristine condition. It almost makes me cry to realise that I'm the person who's going to be reading it and doing unmentionable things to it. I mean, Rob saw my Gaunt's Ghost second compendium volume, and I owned it for 1 week, and in that 1 week coffee got spilt on it, and juice, and food, and I think it fell in the bathtub at least once. It's a shadow of its former self, and considering I paid £10 for it, about 10 days ago.
It does look like a rain-soaked phone directory.
It looks awful.
Rain-soaked yellow pages.
So let's have a look at this.
Okay, so this is the second round of highlighting to exaggerate the forms on the orc. We're going to do one more on the face because the face is the natural focal point.
It's nice how quick these dry, to be honest. I mean, when you water them down, this is something that I always got really bummed out with when I was painting, because I'd slap it on thick and it'd take ages to dry and you couldn't do the next bit. Yeah. But with this style of painting, it's drying, you're moving on, you're getting the detail in, we're seeing a result. I mean, we're only, 1 hour 10 minutes from having started with the basic black prime model, and already we can see a big difference in this.
Yeah, it's we've only got one more stage of highlighting, which is going to be confined to the face. Okay, for the final round of highlights on the face, we're going to add a colour called bleach bone. I prefer to use this than white because it's less harsh.
I think you were saying it's slightly yellowy, didn't you?
Yeah, it's very good for highlighting.
It's a very nice colour, actually, from what I'm seeing at the minute.
It is. I've just used the wrong brush there.
Oh, nice one. More yummy paint.
Yum. It's a really nice, creamy ivory white.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
we just add that.
You see, I can imagine now painting a nice army of skeletons. Dip them in the pot, one after the other, on the lollipop stick. Don't try that.
Okay, so this is the last highlight that's going to be confined to the face.
Okay.
And all we're going to be doing is just touching it over the planes of the face to give a bit of extra definition.
Okay.
And try not to
I have to say, I mean, you know, the Orc's really looking nice so far. I know you're saying it's quite a wobbly job, but I can